themselves. So Ainsley, can you just sort of give us a brief overview of your job and who you are?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ainsley. I work for KFM based at King's College Hospital. I'm one of the buyers here for KFM. So we handle a whole range of medical consumables, from everyday items all the way up to furniture and more specialist items. So I work quite closely with the procurement team. I'm based in the supply chain team, and I work quite closely with the procurement team and the clinicians actually on ward.
Lovely, thank you. Isabel?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Isabel. I'm the Assistant Procurement Officer at Tate, the Tate Galleries. So usually what my role encompasses is running tenders and invitation to quotes on quite like a range of things, from capital projects, architects to stationery and art handling.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
David?
Hiya, I'm David. I work at Sunderland Royal Hospital and I'm part of the procurement team. I'm a buyer. So I deal with everyday purchase orders, invoice queries. I'm slowly but surely getting introduced to sort of the contracting side as well. So I'm doing more, getting more exposure to that. So yeah, that's me.
Fantastic, thank you. And you're on the level 3 apprenticeship, aren't you, David?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Yeah. Okay, over to you, Darren. If you could just introduce yourself, give us a brief kind of synopsis of your extensive experience.
No problem. Yeah, lovely to meet you all. Thank you very much for giving the opportunity to talk to you today. So my name's Darren Todd. So I'm a senior supply chain manager here at, it's now called Fortescue. It did start Williams Advanced Engineering, then it was WAE now. So we've been bought by a big mining company, hence why we call Fortescue. So part of my role at the moment is I was tasked with setting up a supply chain from scratch to develop power systems to decarb the mining industry. So what I've got is a group of commodity leads and senior procurement officers who work on every commodity you can think of that is required to build a power system. The first project we're working on is for a mining truck that's 240 tons in size, so it's pretty enormous. So we look after everything from battery cells, harnesses, cables, electronics, giant castings, nuts and bolts, washers, you name it. We've built a team up that fundamentally will manage that entire supply chain. So that's from, early concept right through to contracting and getting these guys into production. So, and I've been here literally just over 2 years now, but I spent quite an extensive part of my career at Dyson. So I was at Dyson for 7 or 8 years, primarily looking after electronics at Dyson, and then I've sort of moved on to a bit of a startup in the femtech space called LV, and then from then I've come into WAE. So, and it's been quite a varied career, but it's been very much on the direct side and in the commodity space where we look after all the individual bits and pieces that are required. So, and I've got a team of about 10 at the moment. And I've got a counterpart who does the same thing, but on the mechanical side. So so we've basically tasked now to try and get a supply chain set up to develop, and well, we've already developed it. We've now got to build the power systems for the program. So yeah, that's me in a really quick nutshell.
Fantastic, thanks for that. One of the questions that Oliver was going to ask, he couldn't make it today, was that whether you've done the SIPS qualifications yourself. What point in your career were you in procurement when you decided to take the SIPS qualifications? And did it help you get a wider picture of the procurement cycle? Or did it help you focus on certain tasks within procurement that you deal with?
Yeah. So yes, I mean, I did my SIPS when I was at Dyson, so I would probably a reasonable number of years into my career. So I went through the SIPS through a 1 afternoon a week training with APA actually. So I did that for 3 years whilst I was working. I was at least 2 or 3 years into Dyson when I decided to do it. There's quite a few other people in the business who'd started it, and it was sort of one of those things where it became evident that everybody who was doing it was really benefiting from it, and I think it was helping their careers in quite a number of ways. And I think for me personally, it's been a massive help to be able to do this, because primarily I was getting access to talking to different people. You know, I come from my background's quite engineering, in the direct commodity space, but you know, I was working on the course of people from the NHS, from food, from automotive, construction. It was so varied, the people that you spoke to, and you kind of get into this sort of habit that your way is the only way, and and it's so different in public sector, and the indirect space and what I do. There's loads of little bits and pieces that I took out of that, and you know, some of the negotiation methods we do have been pinched straight from the public sector, because it just made sense to do it, and it's been super helpful. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I think for me, the one thing I probably took out of the SIPs that I use a lot of was the contract negotiation section. So I'm actually writing contracts now, and we're negotiating contracts that are, you know, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in annual spend costs with the sales. So they're very key. So I found actually having that grounding in contract law was super useful, and you know, it lets me talk to our legal counsel with a level of confidence now that I can hold my own in some of these discussions. You know, I don't draft all of it. It's just the fact that I know enough to be able to try to get myself through some of that. So I found that particularly useful. And also there was a lot around kind of just good practice. You know, what is good, and you know, like most courses, a lot of stuff in textbooks is like the perfect scenario, and the reality is nothing's perfect in any organization, and there'll always be, but actually knowing the correct way, it really helps you adapt and move forward. So I mean, for me, it's probably one of the most useful courses I did. I mean, it was a long slog, I won't lie, 3 years, and you know, it gets harder and harder as you go through it, but actually my knowledge was increasing. Yeah, and I managed to get through that, and you know, 2 children at home and everything else that other people have, so it was good fun. And I've got 2 people in my current team going through that at the moment. I've got Kelly and Vishak, both started their level 4 through APA. So, and I think there's a couple more are looking to do it. So I've always been like, go through this, put the effort into it, because I think it will pay off in the long run. And a lot of companies are asking for it. You know, it's one of those things that used to be like a nice to have, but I think now you'll see a lot more companies will actively look for that level of qualification, because it kind of shows that you've got the ability to learn to that level. So yeah, I recommend it.
It's definitely the industry gold standard. It's recognised globally as well, isn't it? Certainly level 4, everybody's, you know, has that as a requirement on the job description. Ainsley, can I hand over to you? That I think Darren's answered your first question, but obviously your second question there.
Sure. This is rather embarrassing. I can't remember what the second question was.
Shall I tell you what you were going to ask?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You were going to ask if Darren sees the procurement landscape changing over the next 5 years, with the cost of living continually on the rise.
Yeah, that was the question I had. Thank you.
No,
thank you.
A very good question, actually. Yeah, I mean, for me, the landscape from what I've seen over the last sort of 15 years has changed a lot. And at the moment, I'm really conscious and focused on the fact that we've got a general election coming up in this country, and we have the US elections coming up in this country, and not this country, in the US. So I think the landscape will change. And I think one of the things that everyone's going to need to be able to do is be pretty adaptable in their approaches. You know, what you set now will not be what you do in 3 or 4 years' time necessarily, just because the global you know, landscape is just so up and down. You know, with the conflict in the Ukraine, we've had to change really fast at times. You know, one of the things at the moment, for example, is, you know, we've got a facility in Detroit that we want to build our power systems into the US market, and one of my main concerns is I buy most of my battery cells from China. Now, there's already a hefty import tariff going into China. So what does that mean if whoever gets in power in the US? There's a lot of anti-China rhetoric, so they can put it up. I'm pretty sure they will. So that means the cost of my product landed is unsustainable. So we can't physically sell it for that price, and because no one would buy it. So what we're looking at doing is like little things like localization now. Well, maybe we'll partner with some of the cell suppliers and pull their manufacturing into our US plant to get around these rules. So it's that sort of thinking I think that everyone's going to have to kind of adjust to. I mean, it may depend more on your kind of company and particularly what they do, but I certainly think in anything to do with products, consumer products and automotive, there's going to be so much change over the next few years. You know, we've gone through the whole COVID, we've gone through Brexit, and for me, having a global supply chain that you can adapt and move and switch is going to be key to survival for all of it. And what you'll find is most of the good suppliers will come with you on the journey. So we use a lot of what I call it partnerships now, rather than just transactional suppliers. So I want my supply chain to come with me. So, and they're already thinking about it. You know, these guys are obviously one step ahead of me at times, where they know what might come, so they're trying to adapt themselves because they can't afford to lose business. So it's going to be very interesting the next 5 years. I mean, with all the conflict going on and all the various political things happening, I think you're going to find it quite turmoil. And I think we're in the right career to kind of work with that. I think it comes with challenges, but they're quite exciting when you find ways around them. And I mean that I'm at the stage of my career now where my focus is a lot more on some of these top areas where we're thinking about things that impact the business in terms of strategy and stuff, and how do we get around that. You know, we're talking to some very senior battery cell suppliers in China about these sort of joint ventures and what that means, and licensing agreements, and it's really exciting to be involved with it, but it comes with some real challenges to try and solve those things. So I think, yeah, to answer your question, yes, there's going to be a lot of change in the next 5 years. I think
ever-changing landscape,
yeah,
isn't it? Definitely. Yeah. Isabel, can I hand over to you if you've got your questions?
I don't have my questions. If you can read them.
It's so good that I'm organised.
I do.
So Isabel, you were going to ask if you need any experience or background in engineering related fields to work in procurement in a company like WAE. And what's the structure for the procurement team with regards to different projects and needs? For example, our procurement team's broken down into vehicles, parts of a specific machine, service only, etc.
Yeah, no, a good question. I'll sort of two-parter. So in terms of the first bit, I think supply chain is probably one career path where I think you have a lot of transferable skills and you can move from area to area. And I mean, saying that, WA or Fortescue is a very, very engineering led company. Obviously, everything we do is quite technical in its nature. So lots of people that come into the area do have an engineering background. They may have gone through university and done various whatever qualifications they've done, or they've worked their way through different engineering companies. So I'd say 99% of the people in my team have got that level of background. The more junior members have come from different areas, and I think that's what is good where we are, is that, you know, I am looking to bring more junior people in who are just got the aptitude for it. You know, I'm not expecting them to know how a battery cell is made, or, you know, what goes into a certain component, but actually if they've got the core skills, I can teach the rest, or the other team can. So I think if you're coming in at a lower level, then I think it's a lot more accessible. Obviously, the more senior roles you get, then people are expecting more and more from you. But I think it's useful. I think having a wide engineering background has helped me a lot. I mean, my studying was all electronics based. You know, I started my career in electronics. I worked for Nokia mobile phones, and though you youngsters there probably may or may not remember who Nokia were, but they were the global brand for a long time. So that's where I started, and that was all electronics focused, and that naturally started my enthusiasm for supply chain. Even though I wasn't doing supply chain when I started, I was an engineer, but I wanted to know how things were made, and that's been my progression through. So I think, you know, it would help you guys, depending if that's the path you wanted to go down. But I think depending on the level you're at, any good company should be able to recognise people's ability. They don't need to know the nth degree of a commodity, because we should teach that. That's something we should teach, whether that's through just support from other engineers or just various training bits and pieces. So I've got probably most of my commodity team at coordinator level have all come from just quite various backgrounds. They've got people that have come from, I've got hospitality, and they're just finding their way in the engineering space. So I think, you know, you can do it. You definitely can do it. And
yeah,
then
and I think
sorry.
I was going to say, you can change industry as well, can't you? If you,
Easy,
you've got the expertise in procurement, then you're just learning, as you said, about the commodity then, so you can bring your procurement expertise. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've come from, vacuum cleaners and hair dryers and fans, and there were breast pumps at LV, and now we're making, power systems for a 240-ton mining truck. So all the technology is quite different. The actual process you go through, it's the same. So I think that's why I like this a lot, because I'm not pigeonholed in one area. So I think that's quite good. And so in terms of how we're structured, so when I joined what was Williams at the time, when I joined the team, I came in and I was sort of saying to the COO interviewed me that the approach they were taking wasn't right, because they were all in individual pillars, lots of people doing the same thing, made no sense to me whatsoever. And I said, you need a commodity based structure in the team, in this business. So what I did was we set it up now. So you've got people who would be, for example, battery cells. So they will work on every program in this business. So whether it's on Formula E because we look after Formula E cars, whether it's, all-terrain vehicles, buses, whatever we do the power system for, they're on it. So they get to go across everything, but they've got that focus. So battery cells go across everything, whether it's mechanics and harnesses and connectors, goes across everything. And that's how we structure the business now. So you have the same people, same core group of people who will just go around all the programs, and they just focus on their piece. And then there'll be basically somebody that looks after every part of that bill of materials, and they build that up. Next project. They can work on 3 or 4 programs at the same time, because they're not all in on one program. So I found that's, you'll find that structure is very common in a lot of consumer electronics and product companies, because otherwise you'd end up having these massive teams of people, and when one project's finished, if there's not another one, what would you do with them? So having it this way, we're able to be quite flexible and adaptable. We can scale up when we need to within reason, and it's just really helped the focus. And then business gets to talk to just a few people in that area. The engineers do, the leadership team do, they know who to go to. And I found that's been such a success. We're nearly built the teams up now. I think we're about 25 of us in commodity. So we've got myself and another guy leading, and about 25 different procurement professionals within inside that space, from quite senior people to kind of our entry level coordinator roles. So it's, yeah, for me it works. Other people may disagree, but I like it, and I think it's the team seem to get on that, because they get to work on everything. They're not just going to be on a program for the next 3 years and then another one. So
great, thank you. And what does a typical day of a WAE procurement role look like? What types of procurements are made day to day or over a year?
Yeah,
are they mainly to do with small parts, goods, services, or high or low value? I guess it's everything, isn't it?
Yeah, I was trying to think about this today, actually, like what is a typical day, and I don't think there is a typical day where we are, because it's changed so fast. So like when I joined WAE 2 years ago, there was 380 of us in the business. We've now got 1,200 2 years later.
Wow.
So we've grown enormous. We just moved to our new headquarters over in Kidlington by Oxford Airport. So the way the team's split in terms of maybe what's typical is, obviously they spend most of their days working with engineering and with the quality guys, and obviously with the supplier for whatever part they're working on. So there's a lot of work at the start. We call it like DFX, design for something. So what they will do is they'll work with the suppliers about how best to design that part, because what you're finding a lot of companies is engineers often think they know everything, and they don't. I can say that comfortably because there's none on here at the moment. And so what we do is we basically bring our key suppliers in, and we put the design to them quite early on, and we get a lot of backwards and forwards with them about change this, change that, because we're looking to try and find the easiest way to make that in volume, repeatable, quality's high, cost is low, and you can't do that without involving your supplier. So a lot of the day you'll see a lot of our team doing various meetings with the suppliers and engineers, just getting that part into a position. Then they'll go through a bit more of an RFQ process with obviously the other suppliers. They can start benchmarking that. There'll be rounds of negotiations, and then they go right through to contract and sourcing council. So yeah, there's no one typical day, because they could be off seeing a supplier wherever in the world at one stage. There could be a trade show, could be in the office doing that sort of work. So but some of the other teams, the only team that has a very different approach to us is the Formula E team, because it's ring fenced by the FIA. You're not allowed to have any input because of confidentiality, and we build the battery systems for every car on the grid, so they've all got our power system, even though we can't advertise that. So they have to be separated. The suppliers, you know, there's like an invisible wall there, so their days are quite different. It's very fast. Like if you work in motorsport, where some of the guys have come from, it's really quick, where they release a part or drawing on a Thursday and they need it on a Friday because they're racing on a Sunday. So that's a very different a sort of way those guys work. It's really fast, really quick. There's no forecast, no demand numbers. It's like, I need to get this made, got to find someone, and it's quite intense for really massive bursts of time, whereas my space is a lot more longer term thinking. I'm looking at 5, 10, 15, 20 years and making sure the supply chain is ready to go for that. So there is a very different. So depending where you think you may want to go one day, you know, if you like the speed and the pace and the changeability, then the motorsport industry is quite interesting on that sense, because it's literally about getting stuff. There's no it's late. You know, the car has to race on a weekend. It has to be ready. Whereas my sort of product, yes, we've got a schedule where we want to manufacture, but it's not like the world doesn't stop if it doesn't happen on time, you know. So that's the difference.
Brilliant, thanks for that. Yeah, the last question Isabel was going to ask was, have you changed the way your procurement is strategized since Brexit? And if so, how? Has this been better or worse with regards to value for money and time to procure, sorry?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. So yeah, I would say obviously everyone was highly aware of what was potentially going to come. So I think, you know, maybe I've been a bit lucky, because I've always looked at supply chain as a really global thing. So never had all my eggs in that one basket of buying from this place and that place. So, you know, we've got quite an international supply chain. I mean, obviously, you know, everyone thinks of Asia and stuff, but, you know, we're buying out of Korea, we're buying out of Romania. So it's literally everywhere around the world we're buying from. So what we've seen is, you know, we have a customs team now, but the only thing I've really been focusing on is, because a lot of people will get a part cost, you know, this part costs X, but what I think about is landed costs. So how much of that part costs, not just from someone giving me a quote for that, but how much does it cost to get it to the factory, because that's the real price that you pay. So we've had a real focus on looking at landed cost and, you know, the ways around that, and import tariffs and everything else. And, you know, that's been one of the key things we've looked at, is like the cost of getting those goods into those countries. We haven't seen I don't think I've seen a particularly negative impact from it. I think if I was a small business and my prime customers were in Europe and stuff, I think we probably have a challenge. But I think because we're going to be manufacturing into the UK, so we're bringing goods into the UK, we're not hit by it so badly. And obviously we're going to be manufacturing in the US, and obviously our headquarters in Australia. So we've got global manufacturing sites and a global supply chain. So I think we're, as I was saying right at the start, being able to adapt at quite quick pace is probably the key for a lot of people now. And I think, you know, whatever strategy you deploy, always think about just those things that could come up and bite you, because you can't control global politics. But it just could come out any moment. You know, if Trump gets in, he's already said, you know, minimum 60% import tariffs from China, could go higher. I mean, that's crazy if you ask me. Whether we do or not, I don't know. But, you know, we're having to take that at face value and think about how we get around it.
Yeah, definitely. That kind of leads on to what Nella was going to ask, which is in your previous roles, if you dealt with export control and export control licenses, could you please elaborate on how this fits into or affects the procurement process?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm quite lucky. We've got a customs team where we are at the moment. They're quite new, but in my role before here, one of the things we were doing was building product in Mexico, but the prime amount of material all came from China, the plastics, electronics, and then we had to import that into the US. Now, what most countries have got to get around the import tariff is something called it's the value add. So if you can prove that you've added value by manufacturing there, then you get through the import tariffs. Now, from China to Mexico, you have to show 60% uplift in what you're doing. That does not mean bolting bits together and putting it in a box. That does not count at all. It has to be real engineering value. So we got all our printed circuit boards made at the same site in Mexico, and that actually just about scraped through at 60%. So there's a lot of things to think about there. It's like how, you know, these import tariffs, there are lots of ways and means around some of them, but you have to show transformational value to be able to get onto those things. So we really have a look at all of that. So it's another thing, you know, not necessarily it's the job of a procurement manager, but it's something to have a really good understanding of, that, you know, some of the decisions you're going to make, what that impact means in terms of where you buy stuff. So, and I'm seeing a big push now for lots of companies trying to diversify from China into other regions like Vietnam and Thailand and all those other countries. The Philippines have got very favourable import tariffs into various countries like the US and the UK. And what you'll find is most of the companies in China are now setting up in those locations because they're having to find a way around it. So it's, you know, everywhere you look, when you start scraping the surface of a company and you start going and doing your research into them, you'll often find shareholders linked back that way. So it's quite good fun.
Yeah, interesting. Isabel, you've got your hand up.
I was just going to ask an add-on question to that, by what you mean by transformational value. Is that in terms of like money or environment, because you mentioned decarbonising, or social value of using a one plant? Like, what really goes into that?
Yeah, it's actually in a simplistic way, it's basically how much. So if you're turning these components into a product, how much of that is actually added value? So if everything is manufactured in China, whether it's even the printed circuit board, and you're literally putting that into a product and screwing the bolts in, whatever, there's zero transformational value, because there's no skill. How they see it is there any skill involved in what's going on, or is it just a manual job? So whereas making the printed circuit board involves people that are setting up all of the quite complicated machinery, understanding what's going on, flashing the software, that's deemed as a transformational value. So you've taken something and transformed it into something beyond just bolting it together. And there's different thresholds based on whatever government is determining. 60% is pretty standard. They will often say, so, and the way they calculate that is they'll say, you know, your product cost is $100. So roughly about $60 worth of what your product is has to be transformational. You have to have changed that into something. So, and that's how they, you know, in a simplistic way, that's how they calculate it. So.
Okay, thanks for that. I've also had another question in, which is a good one. If you engage with an incumbent supplier for a new upcoming project and their offer is visibly overpriced for no clear reasons, how would you approach this situation so that you can continue with a collaborative relationship?
Yeah, no, another really good one. So, you know, when we set up our supply chain for the program I'm on at the moment, is, you know, we use the word partnership in all our presentations on purpose, because we wanted them to feel like, I'm not just going to buy this off you and then walk away, or, you know, I just give you a cost and that's it. I really wanted them to feel like they were committed and bought into the journey we were going on. You know, and we have seen that. You know, give a good example on our harnesses. You know, we've been working this supplier on off for many years, apparently, before I joined the business, but they were one of the good ones. And, you know, recently they've gone out to quote for the harnesses. They've come back in pretty uncompetitive, if I'm honest. So what we've done with these guys is, and we do it to everybody, is we have we call it a quotation analysis form. So we ask our suppliers to fill out this, basically it's an like open book costing, I guess you can call it, where they'll break out all of their pricing structure, you know, from profit, overheads, SG&A, any bit of data you need. And that's enabled us to go into their quote, not with the purpose of nailing them and screwing every nickel and dime out of them, but it's actually to help, because often they don't really understand their own costs. And it was letting us go in and go, well, actually, look, all these costs here, that basically if you did this, this and this, you've driven that cost out. Actually, these components here, I can tell you now that we've got better pricing, so we'll transfer our pricing to you. And that's how we're getting around it. So and it really helps. And I think you need that level of, I mean, depending on the commodity, if you're buying post-it notes, then you can buy them from anywhere, and it's just, you know, who can do it the cheapest. But a lot of what we're doing is so integral. You know, we're going to remove the diesel engines from these mining trucks and replace it with a battery power system. So it's got to be cost competitive. It's got to be highly reliable because these trucks last for 20 years. So we're really working with people that are with us on the journey. And I think, you know, when we get an offer that's just visibly overpriced, I think through the experience that my team's got is we've got cost engineers, so they can basically take apart and look at it. And, you know, if there's a big aluminium casting, well, we know the rate, we know the cost of raw aluminium, we know processing cost, all these things enable us to basically able to go back to these guys with a lot of confidence and discuss pricing quite openly and transparently. And I think they've got a lot out of it as well, because they benefit because they're able to go to other customers with a better understanding of their own costs and win more business that way. So I think it's helped. It's one thing I would recommend people do is really, when you look at pricing, is actually whatever you're buying, just have a look into not just the part cost, but actually all the other hidden costs behind if you get access to it. A lot of suppliers will push back and say, no, I'm not doing that, but you'd be surprised at how many will. And then they hide it everywhere. Honestly, the cost is hidden throughout like you wouldn't believe. So it's always been really interesting to see that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, David, have you got your questions that you were going to ask Darren?
I haven't. No, I actually had them on my laptop, but
It's fine.
I have written one down though. So I'll quickly ask this one.
Okay.
How do you see the Procurement Act changing how you run your day-to-day work, and how do you think it'll change, and is that for the good or the bad?
Yeah, so I don't know if this is more related to maybe public sector procurement than where I am. So
yeah,
that's one of these reasons I enjoyed SIP so much, because I got to talk to people in public sector who are going through very different things that I was. You know, when I was chatting to them on sorry, I was trying to Teams me. I was going to shut this one down 2 seconds. So when I was going through that, they were sort of explaining to me about the rules and processes and kind of how they did it. I was like, wow, you know, that sounds like quite, you know, how do you get any value from doing this? Because we're not regulated in the direct, you know, we aren't there. You know, in theory, I can award business to pretty much whoever I want. I'm not bound by any government rules. You know, we're a private company, so for us, it's really about doing the right thing for the business. So I'm probably going to struggle to answer that question because I don't get involved in your space. But I think, you know, if you work in where I do, or any private company, you'll find that you're able to do a lot more than you probably can in the public sector. You know, I go and see suppliers all the time. I'll go and walk in their factories. I'll exclude people on these quotes that come in. I don't have to put things on a public platform. You know, this is me finding the suppliers and bringing them in. So, and that's how we do it. So I know I haven't answered your question, but I think it's such a different space to what you guys probably work in the public sector that you're bound by. You know, your whole tender process, you've put it on a portal, everyone can apply. You have to look at every single applicant in person and go through it. I don't have to do any of that. So
yeah, thank you.
Right then. I was going to say, I know a lot of the Apprentices stuff where you're doing, where we have to submit documents and stuff at the moment, we obviously have to hold off on because of the change in October, so it is sort of halting a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, most of our processes are generally internally driven processes. So, you know, I've brought in what I call sourcing council process to the business. So how do we nominate a supplier and get authority to spend? Because obviously, fundamentally, I don't hold the purse strings, and I still need approval to spend the money that we're going to. So I will go through a sourcing council process where I will actually present how I've got to that decision, what I've done. All the stakeholders with me on the journey, they're all brought into it, and it should just be a case of getting a rubber stamp and going okay. But you know, we have to have gone through that due diligence. You know, we've done our background checks, financial checks. You know, we probably do a lot of very similar things, but I'm not bound by any, I guess, rules and laws around it. It's more about doing the right thing and the due diligence, because it's on you. At the end of the day, whoever I pick is on me. So if I get the wrong one, or I get a supplier that's just woefully not working, that everyone's going to come around looking for me and asking why I did that. So
Okay, thank you. You were also going to ask, actually, David, a couple of good questions that would wrap up this session, which is what's the one piece of advice that you would give somebody 1 year into their procurement career?
Yeah, love it. Another good question. Do you know what I would say is listen. One of my old directors, that's what he always said to me. So there's a real art at listening. You know, I know it's like, you know, everyone's enthusiastic and wants to do well, wants to grow and develop. But I found listening and asking questions of my more experienced peers just so invaluable at the time. You know, just not trying to refrain from jumping in really quick. I was like, he said, just sometimes, you know, don't be afraid of silence in whatever you're discussing. You know, just take it all in, because there's a lot of information coming, you'll learn loads. So I will always say, just don't be frightened to listen, and, you know, don't feel like you've got to make a statement there and then, and just, you know, get the data. Because I think supply chain, you know, it's changed so much. I mean, we're so data driven now in terms of what we get access to, you know, the information at your fingertips. So having the data is really helping us now make some pretty decent decisions. And that just comes through just a little bit of time, a little bit of listening, and not being afraid to take some time to get the decisions right. So I think, you know, when I look back, you know, the desire to be impulsive was just like hard to stop yourself a little bit because you're all enthusiastic. So, but I always remember our old director telling me to just sit and listen. Don't worry about it. You know, I'm not going to tell you off because you take another day to do something because, you know, you're trying to get it right. So I've always said that to my team, is just don't be frightened to listen to people. Just, you know, and ask questions. You don't know, ask. You know, that's the thing. Don't try and wing it because you'll get found out. So I've always thought that piece of advice really set me up a bit. So I do it now.
Definitely.
You know, I've got no problems asking people questions. You know, people more junior than me, they still might know more than me in that area. So go and ask them. It doesn't matter. It's not hierarchical. Just ask questions. Yeah.
That's really good advice. And if you could start your career in procurement again, what is the one thing that you would change, if anything?
God. Geez, when I start again. I'm getting too old now, so I'm thinking of my retirement. I've got my eye on retirement, let alone starting. I think if I could start again, I generally don't know what I would do. I think I'd start a bit earlier than I did, because I think I came in probably later than you guys would have done, because I was very engineering focused at the start, and it was only through being in engineering and going around factories when I was working at Nokia and watching how phones are put together, I just really found that so fascinating, and then I wanted to know how it was made and the cost of it. So maybe I would have made that jump earlier, I think, than I did. But I've been doing it for a long time still, but I still think, you know, maybe I could have done it a bit earlier. I don't know, but I think I wouldn't change a lot. I've been quite lucky. You know, I've been around the world. I've been to so many countries in this role. And that's why I always say to people who are thinking about it, and they should do this in schools more often, is like on careers day, is look at supply chain, because you can go down an engineering path, you can go down the indirect, you can go down public sector, you could be a negotiation person, you could be a lawyer. There's just such a huge different opportunity in this space. You know, not long been back from China, was in Thailand in March. I'm going to Las Vegas for a show in September, and it still blows me away now when I'm still going out these places. That's my job. I really still get that massive buzz from it. It's, you know, I'm long in the tooth, but I still find it. I've gone around so many factories, and every time I go to a factory, I still love it. It's still like I've never been around before. I just find it incredible watching how these people
brilliant.
Make it. It's wonderful. I think it's a really good career choice for anybody, and you'll have a very varied career if you want it. And I think it's quite rewarding when you get a deal, when you negotiate and you get the price and you build those relationships with those suppliers. It's I found it massively rewarding personally over the years. So yeah, I wouldn't change a lot. Maybe a bit earlier. That's probably about it.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. That's good to know. Has anybody got any other questions they'd like to ask Darren?
Yeah, I have another question. At the beginning, you were talking about decarbonising the supply chain. If that is like an overall goal of the company, how is this actually achievable when you're sourcing from places like China or Vietnam? Because obviously they have different policies compared to here in the EU. Is it actually better?
I mean, a brilliant question. So, I mean, one of the things. So, I work for Fortescue, which is an iron ore mining company out in the Pilbara in Australia. So these guys mine millions of tons of iron ore. So what we're focused on at the moment is by 2030, he wants to decarbonize his entire mining industry. So just in terms of statistics, our company currently produces more CO2 for that mine site than the entire country of France. So that's enormous. So, and by 2030, which is what, 5 and a bit years time, he's going to remove 1 billion litres of diesel, all of it from the supply chain. So there'll be no diesel in that production. It'll be green hydrogen, battery power, hydropower, solar, wind, you name it. And that's what we're focused on. So job one is basically to get a supply chain set up to do that job for him. And he goes to COP28, our chairman, and he's very, very vocal and very, very well connected in the politics space. So we're going to do that job first. Now, when I joined, my job was build me a supply chain to deliver that. So that's what we're doing. Job two now is deliver me a supply chain that actually meets all the other objectives like you've just mentioned. So we do a lot of ESG assessments now in our supply chain. So we go into the suppliers and we want to know how much CO2 they're producing. We want to know what their plans are for the future. You know, are you still going to be burning diesel for the next 10 years or coal, or how are you getting your energy? And you'll find there's a lot of companies now that are really getting, I know the news is quite negative at times, but you know, I'll give you an example. There's a battery company in Sweden that we work with who are 100% green energy. All their energy comes from hydropower. So they could basically carbon neutral now. And you know, you're starting to see a lot more companies really get involved in this and really want to be able to do it, because we're asking them all the awkward questions. You know, we go and challenge them on modern slavery. We go, you know, when I go around there, I'm looking to see, you know, what sort, you know, where's your energy coming from? How much of that is renewable? We want those figures because we put them into our reports. So when we go to the board, for example, with some you know, requests for finance, they want to know about that supplier. You know, so my last example is, you know, we bought a massive solar farm it came from China, and ironically, when we did our checks with these guys, you know, there's a lot, you might have heard it, but in certain regions of China, there's a lot of issues with like the Uyghur Muslims and stuff, and poor treatment of them. And so we're very careful about not buying from anything from that region. So they came back to us and said, oh, look, we've got a plant over here, which was in that region, and the price was like there, or you can go from this side, the price was there. So we took that price. So we paid more because we knew that we weren't buying it from there. So, and that's what most companies should have, that kind of mindset around it. I mean, it's very easy when you're a multi-billionaire and you can do what you like, but
yeah,
you know,
I was going to say, if you have that money, of course, is that like quite a barrier to entry for a new company coming in, if this is where everything is moving or wants to move?
Yeah, I mean, I think what he's doing at the moment personally is, you know, all the other mining companies have set 2050 as their deadline, so he's 2030. So what he's going to do is he's basically going to sell the power systems to all the other players in the market. So they won't put the investment in, he will, and then they'll buy it from him. So yeah, he's got to put up a lot of money, but I think he'll get that back in spades eventually. And I think, you know, some of the big players out there need to think like that. Like, we'll put the initial investment in, we've got the capital, let's go and do it, and then other people will follow us. And sounds quite altruistic, I think, but you know, certainly our chairman from a mining company is, he's almost evangelical about this, which is, you know, it sounds really bizarre. You may dig holes in the ground and blow stuff up and iron ore, and yet you want to do this. So it's quite interesting to be in this space right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's wrapped everything up, I think. Thanks ever so much for your time today, Darren. It's been really, really interesting. I'm sure everyone will agree. Yeah, it's been fascinating.
Yeah, it's been really good. No, thank you, Darren.
Anytime, you know, reach out to me on LinkedIn, whatever. It's but yeah, it's always good. Sometimes it's nice to sort of get asked questions like this that takes you back and makes you think about where you come from and what you've learned over the years. So, but it's good. No, and best of luck on your careers and your SIPs, guys. I'm sure you'll smash through that, but it's well worth it. Stick with it, and you'll do really well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Brilliant.
you so much, Darren. It's been really interesting talking to you.
Brilliant. Nice to meet you guys. Take care.
You
Take
too.
care.
Thank
Thanks
you so much.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.